Hey, what's up guys? It is I, Mark Yoon, and today I'm bringing another hopefully exciting video. So what I want to talk to you about today is actually a poll that I put on the community tab of my YouTube channel, and I want to discuss the results of that poll at the end of this video. So if you want to just skip ahead all the fluff and get to that, that'll probably be at the end. I'm sure somebody in the description box or somebody in the comments will actually timestamp that for you. But for any of you who are wondering or stuck in a countless debate with other fans of the Soul Calibur series, talking about which one is your personal favorite, or which one is the best, or which one is objectively overall the best, things can get convoluted really fast, because Soul Calibur, as niche as it is middled with like controversy when it comes to sales figures, underrepresentation, and things of that nature. Even when you look back at the actual sales, which I'll show on the screen right now, and you can say, well, objectively, Soul Calibur 2 was the best because it sold the most. Well, in actuality, it didn't. Those numbers can be misleading because of the fact that it's split up amongst 3 different consoles, and it also includes like the Soul Calibur 2 HD edition, which was released later on the Xbox Marketplace, I believe PC, and on the PlayStation Store. So those numbers get muddled really, really fast, and it's really hard to differentiate which ones are the best just based on sales alone. Obviously, if you're looking at the actual sales, Soul Calibur 5 is pretty bad because that's the one that sold the worst and got the original series canceled. And I want to go over a few things before we talk about the poll and the actual numbers. So, Soul Calibur 5, as controversial as it is, I will say had some good aspects to it. It's not a total trash game across the board. It had the best character creation system in the entire franchise. It had an endless card battle mode in which you can battle against other real world like character creations, which you actually can do in Soul Calibur 6, by the way. It's just locked behind Libra of Souls. There's a lot of different aspects of that game. A lot of people talk about the gameplay, that they really like the gameplay of Soul Calibur 5, but gameplay is usually meddled between like people who like Soul Calibur 2 better or people who like Soul Calibur Modern better. That's usually like the two camps that go at it about gameplay wise. As far as content, Soul Calibur 5 has the least in the entire series, even behind the original game like Soul Edge and Soul Blade. And Soul Calibur 1. Like, Soul Calibur 5 just has like no content, and that's a lot to do with the fact that the director wanted to model Soul Calibur 5 based on Street Fighter Third Strike, get rid of all of like the older characters and introduce a whole bunch of new characters and be as successful as that was, not knowing that Third Strike wasn't actually a successful game at launch. It took time and years to be able to become successful. But anyway, we all know the story behind that, and I do have a mini documentary on it called The Road to Soul Calibur 6, I believe, and that's in the playlist for many documentaries. But there are good aspects to it, just as there are good aspects with any of them. Soul Calibur 4 is the least Soul Calibur game out of all of them, but it has the best graphics because it had the largest budget, save for possibly Soul Calibur 3, but we don't really have a lot of numerical details when it comes to that, but the finances behind it. Sony, in case you guys don't know, Sony actually bought the distribution rights, and they actually were the ones that actually paid to distribute the game of Soul Calibur 3, which is why it's only on PlayStation 2 and will be forever locked there. But Soul Calibur 4 was actually looking for funding, and instead of just using a guest from the upcoming Star Wars The Force Unleashed, LucasArts actually partially financed the game, which is why we have the only ever playable guest villain in all of the guests for Soul Calibur, because Soul Calibur usually only uses the main hero protagonist of a series as their guest, that being Vader, and which is why they also have Yoda, and which is why there's also Star Killers baked into the game, beyond the fact there's actual Star Wars music and Star Wars levels, and it's actually integrated within the story. So Soul Calibur 4 is kind of the black sheep story-wise, even though I would say the story is overall worse than Soul Calibur 5. In Soul Calibur 4, as positive as those things were, it felt almost like a Mortal Kombat 8, which is like Mortal Kombat vs. DC, in my opinion. It doesn't feel really like a Soul Calibur game. It feels like a game that Soul Calibur is the setting of, but it's not like the whole source around, if that makes sense. Soul Calibur Soul Edge actually had a lot of functionality systems that like never made it past the first iteration of the game, which is Soul Blade and Soul Edge, that I feel like should have stayed. They actually have weaponless combat in that game because it's in a roundabout way. So what happens is like you can actually damage your opponent to the point where you knock their weapon out of their hands, and they'll fight like with hand-to-hand combat until they go get their weapon, unless it's knocked out of bounds, in which they have to fight for the rest of the round with fisticuffs as opposed to a blade. And that was a really interesting and gameplay thing, and threw a good dynamic into the game, and it's probably a really good feature that I love of that game. It started a lot of the story and a lot of the lore, and like cemented it and concreted it, which is why like when you played Soul Calibur 6, it started off from the time period in which the original Soul Calibur 1 took place, and the events of Soul Edge are briefly gone over as having actually happened in that universe as well, meaning that the timeline diverged sometime after Soul Edge and before Soul Calibur 1. So that being said, there's a lot of positive aspects to all of the games. There's a lot of negative aspects to all the games as well. Let's just go through them. All right. Soul Edge and Soul Blade would be accessibility. It didn't come over into the States until like a really long time. And the version of Soul Blade and Soul Edge is actually different than in all the other countries because of the history between like China, Japan, and Korea. In South Korea and China, the game that was released actually has Hwang Sung-young as the main character, and he's actually flipped with Mitsurugi. Because of what happened with like the atrocities of the Japanese government and the samurai in those countries. So samurai were a little sensitive to those countries, so they didn't want a samurai as a main character. So in those two versions of the game, the Hong Kong version, which by the way, the Hong Kong versions are always the only versions of the Asian specific games that you can actually get with the original language and subtitles. So the menus also being in English, I mean. So if you ever want to play a Japanese game, like let's say Dead or Alive Extreme Beach 3, which like never came here. Well, it came here, but you know what I mean. Like you can actually play the Hong Kong version of that game, and you'll have English menus, so you won't have to like translate and stuff. But anyway, so that was mired in controversy, just even in the arcades, where they actually flipped the heroes. So Mitsurugi played a secondary role, and Hwang Sung-young, a Korean character, was actually the main character. This actually shows a lot in the story, which is why he becomes like evil or possessed by Soul Edge by the end of it, and that's where you get a lot of like the evil Hwang Sung-young stuff, like where you see like the like him turning towards the camera when he's possessed, and that's where you get the alternate for him in Season 2 for Soul Calibur 6. So yeah, but I think the gameplay was great for the time, the graphics were great for the time, 3D was just budgeting, so of course it's very like blocky, but it still somehow feels more fresh than some of its counterparts in that time period as well. Soul Calibur 1 was a great game. I played it, I believe, on the Dreamcast first. I think it's only on Dreamcast. I know it got released on the Xbox Live Marketplace sometime later, but I just have a lot of fond memories with that game just because like I was trying so hard to like put value into my Dreamcast and not have wasted my money. And there were great games on there that I played, like Shenmue, Crazy Taxi, Code Veronica, Resident Evil, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Soul Calibur 1. So I have a lot of fun memories with that time period before the PS2 actually came out, where I spent a lot of time in that game for that reason. And then when PS2 came out, I think I had gotten rid of my Dreamcast already at that point, so I had started off with Soul Calibur 2. Now, what drew my attention to Soul Calibur 2 wasn't necessarily like the gameplay like a lot of people do, it was the guests like a lot of the casuals do. I did buy all three versions, but the version I played the most was the Xbox version, just because like I'm such a huge fan of Spawn, that like being able to play as Spawn in a fighting game at that point was like mind-blowing to me. I know a lot of people like Link also, but the GameCube version is actually like the least selling version of that franchise. Maybe it's because the relationship between GameCube owners as a sole console and fighting games is not really correlative there. I had all three systems, but most people that bought it already had all three systems. You know what I'm saying? It's a kind of weird thing to say, but like just because Link was the guest in that game doesn't mean that like fighting game fans wanted to jump in there. I think the only thing that they had at the time was like Smash, which was like not taken that as seriously back then, from the 64 era. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It does have really solid combat. The story is a little bit lacking. The labyrinth mode is like okay. There's no creative character yet, so like Soul Calibur 2, even though I play the HD version quite a bit still, it doesn't rank up there for me personally as like the best, just because the content's just not there. There are some cool hidden like bosses like Night Terror and stuff like that you have to do a lot of stuff with, and just being able to play a spawn verse. Well, you can't actually do spawn verse Link in any version of the game because there is not really online for that game, and the content you can't cross over like with other players, so you won't have like a spawn verse Link unless you mod it. But even in the HD version, Link's actually not included because Nintendo doesn't host Soul Calibur games anymore. The last game that they had was, besides Soul Calibur 2, was the spin-off game Soul Calibur Legends on the Wii. And that's not a main series Soul Calibur game, so I don't really count that, even though it was canon to the old timeline. But I don't know, there's like a lot that I can say about that. But 3 is my favorite, obviously, because it's got the most content. That's where you actually introduce character creation, which, albeit at the time, wasn't nowhere near as good as it is now. I still spent tons of time, especially in Chronicles of the Sword, because not only can you create your character in which like you're like coming up and like becoming the leader of this like alliance or whatever, you are creating all the characters that you meet along the way too. Like every character that joins you can actually customize. So I had like an entire army of ninja, you know what I mean? So like there was a lot of fun to be out behind that, especially like finding like the hidden bosses on the stages that were like supremely OP at first until you like way over leveled. But Soul Calibur 3 is definitely my favorite. I actually like the more anime aesthetic too to that game anyway. I think it suits the series and franchise well. Soul Calibur 4, as someone who's not a huge Star Wars fan, like I was like whatever. Like I do like The Apprentice, and I still own and play a lot of The Force Unleashed. I thought that was fun, but mainly for the gameplay. But like it looks the best out of the entire franchise. It does, but I don't know. Soul Calibur 5 I've talked about ad nauseum, so I don't need to recover that stuff here. I've made plenty of videos. You guys can go back and watch that. Obviously most people are interested in the gameplay aspects of it, and there are other fans out there of Patroclus and Pyrrha, but when it comes to it, most of the people hate the replacement characters. They think they're just cheap rip-offs and imitations with less dialogue and less like backstory than the original characters that they're attempting to replace. Patroclus and Pyrrha are some of the most ridiculous and most hated characters in fighting gamedom, to the point where like the series actually got canceled. Project Soul was dispersed, and it took like years later of them actually trying to get another go and like create a whole new team around it to actually like make Soul Calibur 6. So Soul Calibur 5 though does have the best creation engine, and it does have the endless card battle mode that I talked about before. So overall, I guess like it's not all bad, but as far as in the lineage of games concerned. So I'm going to read the results of the poll off of my phone while I'm actually showing it on screen. That way I could just like reference it, because I don't remember the exact numbers for everything after I took it. This is of a sample size of 120 people, which is a small sample size, but that's who voted on the poll like 3 days ago, so that's what I have to go by. So this could be taken with a grain of salt, but this is a general, I guess, idea of at least the people that like reply to polls in my community, based on like what they think their decision is. So I asked for an upcoming video, which Soul Calibur game is your favorite? If not listed, say in the comments, because there's only a certain amount of options on YouTube community section. And then we got Soul Calibur 2 with 18%. Soul Calibur 3 and 6 are actually tied with 29%. Soul Calibur 4 and 5 are the least favored, also tied at 12%. So you can see just by that poll alone that the consensus, or the general consensus, seems to be that Soul Calibur 3 and 6 are the best in the franchise, and Soul Calibur 4 and 5 are the least favored, at least. So, I don't know, what are your thoughts? I'd love to hear your opinions in the comment section down below, and we can always take the conversation over to Discord as well. And your thoughts are always welcome. And as I always say, guys, I love it. Thank you.
And thank you.